Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR, a weekly podcast where we explore the forces shaping our roles today, from new technologies, shifting expectations to tightening budgets. I'm your host, Felix Mitchell. Before we get going, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Instant Impact, for supporting this episode. Instant Impact happens to be my company, and we're making world-class talent acquisition a reality for SMEs by providing a range of embedded talent solutions, from full recruitment outsourcing to workforce planning and other advisory services. If you're in HR and you're overwhelmed with the sheer volume or complexity of recruitment challenge, then please do get in touch. Visit instant-impact.com, where you'll be able to book in a call. Just specify that you've come in through the podcast, and I'll personally jump on a call to talk through your talent acquisition strategy headaches. Now, on with the show.
There's a real power to being transparent with your team. There are companies that share every detail of their P&L, every raise, every piece of relevant news, whether that's good or bad. And they boast workforces that are, well, according to them, fully aligned with broader business strategy, and they truly understand decisions that come down from leadership. It feels like one of those topics that, much like the 4-day work week will be in the future, or working from home was, it's only going to trend in one direction. I think we're going to get there eventually. But as much as being transparent sounds like a great idea and feels like the right thing to do to most leaders I speak to, it feels pretty scary and fraught with risk and extra effort for business leadership. Are people going to freak out if they get bad news? Even if there's a good sort of explainable reason our employee's going to quit when they realize they're getting paid less than their peers? Or like even, we're going to have to spend all of our time explaining our decisions. It's pretty complex. And that is why I'm really excited to have Zoe Ogden on the show today, who's People Director at Impression. Zoe's leading the transparency transformation from the front. So we're going to spend the next 30 minutes really digging into those benefits and challenges and hearing about her journey. Zoe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, let's jump in. I know that you're a big fan of transparency. I'd love to understand the journey that you've gone on personally with this topic.
Yeah, and I think the ethos around why I like all of this stuff is probably from personal experience, actually, as many things are shaped by our own personal experiences. And I feel that when I've now come into a position of leadership and being able to shape certain things, I want to lead by example of things that I know I would have really appreciated earlier on in my career. And I think that having an open forum for discussion can only lead to something that is great for everyone. And as you alluded to in the introduction, it's a fine line to balance. You might get it right, you might get it wrong. There's definitely some lessons to be learned, and it is quite a complicated space to operate in. But I think ultimately, like you said, it is the direction of travel. And so a lot of businesses need to start looking at some of their internal practices and working out how can they be a bit more transparent, and what does transparency mean to them?
Yeah. And as you say, transparency does mean a lot of different things to different people. Have you come across any misconceptions that you think we should just knock on the head before we really get deep into this, so that, someone listening doesn't think that, just make sure that we're all aligned on the same way of thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have seen on job adverts for certain different companies, things about how everyone's emails are just open and everyone's calendars are just open. And I think there is an extreme version of this where that feels like, oh, but we're all, able to look at everything together and all of that kind of stuff. But in reality, that doesn't work on so many practical levels. I would not want people seeing my emails. There's sometimes incredibly confidential stuff in there that concerns people's personal data. So of course, already that's a no. Even appointments, if someone was going through something and they didn't want to share that, and obviously that's personal choice, then having something in their calendar that's a private appointment, that should remain private, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, I'm having lunch with my mum in a few days. I've got that marked as private. It's kind of I know I just put it on the podcast, but it's no one's business.
Well, exactly. Everyone has different boundaries for what feels comfortable like that. So I think it's not really that stuff that I would be talking about and advocating for. It's the stuff more about sort of the company-led transparency rather than personal individual transparency, because again, that is such a personal choice.
So let's get into some of the, before we go into what you mean by that, I feel like there's some immediate grey areas that I want to make sort of a line on. salary. Mm-hmm. Where do you stand on? I mean, there are some people saying that everyone's salary should be publicly available, either within the organization or just generally. That feels tough.
Yeah, so we do have salaries open. Wow. We have the bands. So I think this is it. So everyone is allocated like somewhere within a band. So either 0.1, 0.2 and 0.3 and that allocates the salary. And the reason why we do that is because we have a really, again, transparent framework behind that says to earn this salary, these are the skills that we need to see. This is a value that you need to bring. And we have broken that down very granularly into the amount of like monthly revenue that someone would carry. So it shows that financially, that's actually a mathematical equation. Like we've worked that salary out based on this amount that you could carry for us because that team needs to generate this amount of income for us to pay all of the people in that team those salaries and still continue to make a profit to reinvest back into the business. So I think for us, it was a conscious choice to decide, do you know what, we're going to show people the commercials behind it. And so that it kind of alleviates that whole, oh, well, what's so-and-so doing? Like, you know, I definitely had that in my career early on, which I think is why I'm so passionate about it, where I would look at my peers, and especially if I looked at someone who I didn't think was particularly pulling their weight, and I'd be so curious as to what they were earning, and I would think in my mind, like, do they earn more than me? Because I'd be annoyed if they did. Whereas in this framework, it's sort of suggesting, actually, like, everyone has the opportunity to earn whatever they can around these parameters, and we've got a very fair way of calculating it all, and the review process as well. The way we go through the process is very transparent, and we have lots of different calibration sessions to like check marking basically. So I'm trying to put as many things in place that would make people feel comfortable with why we've made certain decisions on salary. So again, you know, not saying that everyone's always going to be happy all the time, but at least we can show like why. And I just think it is important because then hopefully people aren't comparing themselves. They're just looking at their own journey. But, you know, it's natural human behavior. So that still happens. But as long as we're trying to do everything that we can to have like good conversations around salary, and then especially when people are being hired in, they can't really negotiate more because we say, well, I can't really pay you that because then you'd be paid more than the entire team. And that's not fair. Like there's people doing the same job as you that we pay this. So in the hiring process, we are really clear on where we stand with that, which again, I think helps because some people are like, do you know what? They've been honest with me. And also there's many other benefits to working with them. So I may take a tiny pay cut to come and join them, but actually I'm going to get this, this and this. So I suppose it's like letting people have the information and then they can make up their own minds.
Look, it sounds great.
Yeah.
But so as I understand, so that's how it works for people who are revenue generating or revenue delivering.
All of us.
So you all know what you mentioned. It was linked back to revenue somehow, right?
Yeah, so it is for those roles. So that's easier to calculate for sure. But we have to do the same equivalent. So say like in people, we've said for this many people within the business, we could justify paying for X roles in the team because otherwise it doesn't really make any sense. You know, you can't have a HR team of 10 when you've only got 70 people. So it's kind of saying like with growth, everyone could grow. There's opportunity for everyone. And it's the same in terms of the finance team, the marketing team. I can't remember the criteria exactly, but I'm sure marketing team, it's like opportunity value. Finance team, I think it is revenue. So it's trying to link it back to something tangible and not just, you know, oh, I think they're doing a good job. It's like we want evidence-based decision-making on this. And that's something I say all the time is transparency, fairness, consistency, and evidence-based when it comes to salary. That's my sort of ethos.
I love that ethos. No, I do. I think it's sounding really cool. I'm just going practical now.
Okay. Yeah.
How did you was it you that introduced this? Was it during your tenure?
Yes. Yeah, it was.
So I'm imagining many, many, many tabs on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
How did you go on this transformation?
Yeah, so I remember when I joined, so it was actually 3 years ago last week.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And they already had a basis of this, which I think is why when I was interviewing for this role, I thought, oh, well, this is a really good match because they're already starting to put things like this in place. But it was only for certain roles. I think mainly like the performance team roles where you came in as like a grad and it sort of showed you what your earning potential was. So it wasn't too difficult to transition that to taking it to the next level and to also include like leadership level roles as well. And it had to be based on evidence. So there was a huge salary benchmarking exercise, and we've continued to do that every year since, because it's so important that that data is still accurate. So we committed to that we would check it and make sure that we are still paying competitively. And we have made changes accordingly when we've found out that maybe we perhaps weren't. But that is, again, a big conversation. We tell people that's what we're doing. We ask them to, contribute survey data as well, just to help us to understand how they feel about benefits and like total package. So I would say in year one, it was probably a transition getting used to this information being sort of there. And every year we've sort of refined it and realised that actually we need to add something in, or something wasn't clear or whatever. And it is evolving as we are evolving as a business, but the principles of that have remained the same, which is really fantastic to see.
And are there people who feel uncomfortable with other people in the organisation knowing what they earn?
Do you know what? It hasn't really come up, which is interesting, because I feel in other organisations that I've even worked in, well, especially leadership, would not want their salary to be open to everyone at all. But then you question why. If you feel comfortable that you are bringing value, why would you not be comfortable saying, hey, do you know what? Like, yeah, I carry this much responsibility and look after this amount of people, and therefore accordingly my salary is this, because that's what the market would pay me if I went elsewhere. And that's just fact.
For those that are less ambitious and have decided to take a cut in earnings, I almost feel like sometimes those people would be the ones who are uncomfortable with their peers knowing how much they earn, because maybe they would be earning less than they were, and they were using salary as a benchmark of success previously. So I guess what I'm asking for, what I'm trying to get to the core of is, are there people for whom this would feel pretty uncomfortable?
That is a really interesting point. I hadn't really considered that per se, but it's probably because we try and talk around the idea of total reward language rather than it just being about salary. And it should be about all the other things as well that encompasses total reward, especially the things that you feel are more weighted for you. And that is really different depending on what life stage you're in. So if you're trying to buy a house, of course, the most important thing you care about is the salary at the end of the day, because you're trying to secure a mortgage. But once that's done, and maybe you're on to the next phase, like you say, family, you actually probably think, oh, yeah, like I said, I want some flexibility. I just want to be in a role where I'm not feeling too stressed, so I have a better quality of life when I'm with my family. And again, like, it's about kind of weighting that. So finding a company that sort of ticks boxes in all areas, I think, is more important than just going after the highest salary possible. And we've tried to really, again, like have that type of conversation as well, because there are only so many roles in leadership position. And whilst people are in those roles, that, for some people, they're going to have someone above them. But does that mean that now they feel like they don't enjoy their job? Hopefully not, because hopefully they're feeling valued, they're enjoying what they do, they're feeling challenged, they have the flexibility, whatever it is that's important for them. And because we review our salary bands, even if they're not like increasing to get a promotion, the bands may still increase year on year. So therefore their positioning within that band means that they're going to have a little bit of a pay increase. So it kind of keeps in line with that. So there still is movement, and hopefully no one feels like they're plateauing. They're either, finding something through the challenge of the job, or they're learning something new, or whatever that thing is. Hopefully every year, everyone still feels like they're getting something from it. And I think at that point, when you feel like you're not anymore, then maybe it's time to move on. But I think to be inclusive fully, you really do have to think about all the different types of things that people might enjoy at your organisation, and really trying to tick a box in all of them.
Hey, totally right. Have you found, did you collect pay gap information before and after?
Well, so interestingly, obviously, one benefit to this is that there shouldn't be any gaps based on any factors, because the idea is that regardless of who you are in the organisation, what's going on for you personally, however you identify, if you are X person doing that role, you get paid the same as X person doing that role. And that's that. So it's really helped us in terms of thinking about that kind of pay equality across many different factors. Although I guess we probably didn't, that's probably one thing that maybe we could have compared at. We didn't really make that comparison beforehand, but it's definitely moved into a positive space now. And also, I guess, because historically, and maybe again, like I'm from a generation where I probably wouldn't have really ever asked for more because that's just not something that would have felt comfortable for me. And again, it kind of goes back to that male-female difference in terms of like pay negotiation. So now that's like alleviated, like no one needs to ever sort of ask for more because the way in which to get it is really outlined for you. So as long as you're like doing the things and ticking the boxes, it will come. And it's like a fair process in that sense. So for me, it feels like we are creating, like I said, that consistency of decision-making and that fairness. Not saying that there's equality, because sometimes there just isn't, but there's equity at least.
That's really cool. And do you have other factors that come into it, like where you're based?
Yeah, so there is for London. Yeah. Just because again, the market tells us that. So whenever we do the benchmarking, we've got to go with that. But again, we're completely transparent about that. That everyone understands that that's the case.
Great. Well, I'm sold. But we all know that salary transparency is not the be all and end all of transparency. More generally, I think you and I spoke in prep for this around transparency around decision making, and helping, keeping the business up to date with the good news and the bad news, the scary plans and the exciting plans. How have you rolled that out in your business? What does it feel like?
Yeah, so we did actually get quite a lot of feedback, probably in my like first to second year, that when we were doing our quarterly company updates, where we bring everyone together, it almost felt to them like it was a showcase of like all the good. And to that end, it was maybe coming across slightly patronising. And, because people know it's not always good. Like sometimes it's been a little bit difficult or, we've lost a bit of work or whatever, just normal things that happen in a business. But I think the way that we always used to think about it was like, oh, we have to be super positive so that everyone feels really positive and everyone feels really pumped up. But, people can see through that because they're adults. They've been in meetings where maybe things haven't felt as positive. And so it was really interesting that people were giving us that feedback that at those events, they wanted more balance. And do you know what? It was really enlightening. It was like, oh, yeah, actually, let's just be ourselves. So we really put an onus on trying to, be as authentic as possible while still shouting about all the really good things that are happening as well. So I think it's not about sort of, being performative to either camp. It's about just talking honestly about what is the situation right now. And we've definitely had, like, say, at the end of last year, it was a tougher year last year, for sure. But we really positioned that in the context of what was going on in general in business, what was going on for other agencies, some of the decisions that we had to make, which might not have been the most, popular decisions, but in order to maintain everyone's jobs. And those kinds of, like ordinarily we might have spent a bit more investing in such and such, but actually this year we couldn't because we wanted to make sure that everyone still had a job at the end of the year. And just explaining like, these are the things that go through our heads as leaders and these are the things that we've decided to prioritise. I just think it means that people go, oh, okay, yeah, I can understand that, because maybe they can empathise or put themselves in the shoes of someone making those decisions. And that's been really positive. And we haven't felt like the vibe's gone down because we might have shared a few bits that haven't been as, exciting that year. The vibe is still really good. And I actually think it's better because people just feel like we're talking to them one-on-one.
They probably trust what you're saying.
Yeah.
They trust the positive more than they did before, I would imagine.
I would say so, yeah, because now when we're being positive, they're like, oh, they're genuinely being really positive. So that's really cool.
What level of financial transparency do you provide? Yeah,
so I would say we're very good at sharing everything, but I would say we probably do keep it top level still because, it becomes a bit confusing going into the numbers in like real detail. And we've definitely lost the audience when we've done that before. I hope my head of finance doesn't mind me saying that, but she presents it in such a fantastic way, I would say, like comes in, like explains, what you need to know, like the important bits and what does this mean for everyone, sort of translates it. And I would say like putting the targets out at the start of the year and then keeping like a tracker of those targets every time we come together just helps people understand a bit more about where we're positioning. And again, like maybe seeing why. So if we've had like a really strong positive start to the year, which hopefully we're having at the moment, we're still going to be cautiously optimistic. And that's what we always kind of talk about. So people get like, oh, things might be pretty good, but we're not going to celebrate too early. We want to see that still happen for the rest of the year. So I guess like it kind of helps people just position where we are at the moment.
So you share targets.
Yeah.
Do you share profit?
Yeah.
So one of the concerns that Instant Impact have had, or people I've spoken to about sharing profit, is whether people will get spooked if there's a loss-making year, for example. Have you been in that? So, I mean, what would you think if you guys run a loss-making year? How would you manage that within the organization?
Yeah, so last year we didn't hit target and we had to reforecast halfway through the year. Again, we were really open and honest about that. And it did mean that we didn't invest as much as we did the previous year into things like our benefits or our learning and development offering, because we obviously had to make those choices. But we chose to prioritise some different things. So, for example, we chose to prioritise uplifting all of our what we call like IC level bandings, because as a leadership team, in discussion with like the team below, everyone agreed that if we were going to invest anywhere, we wanted to put it into those individuals, and like everybody else would just forego anything. And you know what? That felt really amazing that everyone had that same kind of mindset about that. And so to be able to then talk about that and say, look, it might not be exactly what you're expecting, but we're still really trying. We want to do these things for these reasons. It felt like a stronger message to go out to everyone with. And I suppose as well, having that, again, like that sustainable business mindset, because we target like a certain EBITDA, and that's because we want to make sure that we do have enough if something went wrong. And I think people in the agency industry in particular have seen like peers and other businesses not doing so well and making layoffs. And we see, unfortunately, that we're seeing a lot of that within agency world. And yet we've not had to do that, thankfully, and long may that continue. And even in the COVID years, it was slightly before my time, but they didn't furlough at all because they didn't need to, which was great. They could retain everybody. But that was only because they made smart choices to sort of keep a good amount of profit there, ready to use if they needed it. So I actually respect the way that they go about that and the logic behind that. And then when we do have like a slightly more profitable year than normal, it does mean that we have a bit more to play with in terms of budgets for next year, in terms of like things that we want to reinvest in, software, all that kind of stuff. And again, we can kind of talk to that and speak to that. But I think what you're saying, like the idea of a loss doesn't have to be scary if you think about like, how are you going to come back from that? What are we going to do differently? And we definitely did. So we, like I said, didn't have the best year last year. Still not bad, but we didn't grow the way that we wanted to. And they've spent probably about 6 months relooking at our proposition and relooking at our pitches and even like our slides, the storytelling. What can we do to ramp it up? Maybe we've rested on our laurels and that's why we didn't see the growth. So everyone's come back fighting this year and it's been like really inspiring almost to see that happen. So if it's done in the right way, it can really kind of drive the right behaviours. Again, like it kind of depends how you position it, doesn't it? If you're really neggy and doom and gloom, of course, everyone's going to feel really rubbish about everything. So
yeah, it's interesting. The story you're telling it's carbon copy of what we went through as well. Missed our targets, didn't grow as much as we wanted to, but then work with everyone to think about whether we had the right proposition, whether we've got the right, and we have also, touch wood, been able to avoid. Actually, I don't need to touch wood. We have also been able to avoid those redundancies, which have been quite widespread in our space as well. So it's really interesting. I think the that profit piece is a really interesting one. I guess you have to have like a level of do you have to invest some time in some financial education?
Yes, actually. So something that the commercial team did, which was really great, was put together an e-learning that was a little interactive one, but it was so specific to how Impression runs in the background. And we asked everyone to do it prior to us having our end of year company update, so that some of the things that were being mentioned, everyone's, EBITDA, everyone understood, hopefully, if they went through the module, which they looked like they did, everyone understood what EBITDA was. Because again, like think about it, a lot of our people come straight from graduating into our business, don't understand how businesses operate. I didn't. So of course, like, why are we assuming that someone gets it? They probably don't. They probably just think, oh, well, we're winning loads of pitches, so why haven't I got a pay rise? It's so much more complicated than that. And there's so many more expenses as well. Like the operational costs of running a business, as you will know, are so high. Even like having a building to be in, like rent is massively going up, all those kinds of factors as well. So to help people understand like how it all works, I just think, again, like speaking of transparency, it's actually a business's duty, I think, to educate people about some of how the ins and outs of business work and take people on that journey with you. And also so that they can potentially hold you accountable as well if what you're saying isn't quite working out. So yeah, I think it was a really smart decision to do that. And we'll keep doing that because it is really important that people understand and have a forum to ask questions as well.
How about your sort of big company decisions? Pretty sure you got B Corp accredited?
Yeah.
Congratulations. I hear that's a big process.
Yeah.
What sort of level of transparency did you have with the team? Did you say you were going to go for it? Did you say why? I'd love to have a little case study on what that looked like.
Yeah, so again, I think the process kicked off before I joined actually, but one of the values is business for good. So it kind of felt hand in hand with that because everyone sort of naturally believed in what we were doing subconsciously, I suppose, including like the way that we run certain business practices and thinking about the types of clients that we might want to work with. So the B Corp thing felt really natural to go for. And also what we like about it is that it really makes you think. Like you have to, like I said, give so much information. So you really have to do like an internal exercise to check everything you're doing and then make improvements. So we came through just now, back end of last year, like the re-verification process, because you have to show that you're making improvements on your score. So again, like we wanted to share that really openly. We put together like our impact report, basically. We do that on an annual basis to explain like how are we scoring in all of these areas and just being really, again, transparent with everyone, because there's some areas where we weren't probably doing as well as what we need to be. But again, we've been able to say, oh, we recognise that, we're going to work on this by doing these things. And so bringing people on that journey has been great. And again, it goes down really well. Even from like an employer brand perspective, people mention it when they come for interviews and things like that. So it definitely is something that people recognise and want to be a part of as well.
So were there any tough decisions that you had to make as a business during that B Corp process?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the tough things is now having that B Corp, having to be really rigorous about clients and thinking about the impact if we take on certain work that might not fall in line with that. So we've had like recent examples where we're working with like real big global companies that are incredibly profitable, and our contract with them is obviously as well incredibly profitable. And luckily, again, we don't set it up so that we're reliant on like one piece of work. We do kind of spread it out, which is great, but it still makes a massive difference to our bottom line if we're getting like a large retainer, a sizable retainer. And with some political stuff kicking off, as I'm sure we all know, there was a question from the team about should we be working with them? And quite like straight away, a lot of emotion around that question and people having a lot of opinion and messaging each other, messaging some of the leadership team, sort of really having strong views. And I think that was probably the first time, but it's a good learning because we may come up against this again, where we were a bit like, right, okay, we really need to balance this because, having B Corp is so important, of course, and having those principles and business for good is really important as well, of course. But business for good, you could arguably interpret that as one of the things that we want to do is do good for our people. So if we turn around and said, no, we're not going to work with you anymore, we've lost a heck of a lot of money. That could result in job losses. We haven't obviously costed it, but, losing something quite sizable, if we don't win that again, when they're not sustainable throughout the rest of the year, and then we might have to make hard decisions at the end of the year. So it was really about sitting down with the team, firstly, talking to them about how to channel some of those questions, because getting into a frenzy on online chats is not the way. So as much as we're into like open, transparent, all that kind of stuff, sometimes having those types of opinions in those types of forums probably isn't the right way and, isn't sensitive to what everybody else might think. So raising it in the right channels, firstly, and then allowing us to sort of respond and have a conversation. And that's all it is, like an open dialogue. And at the end of the day, if someone wasn't happy with the decision, I mean, to be honest, that all kind of resolved itself, which was good in that case. But if someone wasn't happy with it, at least we've explained why. And then it's up to them, isn't it, to make a decision on whether they can continue working with us. But I think all of us have to feel like we can rationalise it in our minds why we're making a certain decision.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love that you brought out the, people talking in back channels. I think that for transparency to work, it's a two-way street.
Yes, absolutely.
And if you as a business are opening up channels and forums to explain business decisions, I think the flip side of that is there's a really big expectation on employees not to set up secret WhatsApp groups or message over Slack, which, by the way, if we wanted to, we can find and read. It's not as, but I think there's that real expectation that's created. So have you, since that time, have you helped your employees to feel more, I guess, safer discussing decisions that they may be not comfortable with in a company forum rather than in a hidden personal one?
Yeah, so, well, already we felt like we had options for people, but whether or not they wanted to utilise that, I suppose, maybe that fell down on that occasion. But we do have executive sponsors, which is usually one of the management team on the big accounts, so that they've got a point person who's senior that they can go to if there's any concern. It doesn't have to be a concern like that. It could be a concern about the account team, about performance, whatever it is. So there's definitely somebody there that they could talk to who understands what's going on with that. And then we also have like a weekly check-in where we ask people a couple of questions. They have to rate their week. No one's like scored on it or anything like that. It's not about that. It's just to understand like how are people feeling. And sometimes, personal stuff going on, they'll mark a little bit lower. It's not reflective of work, but it's just to express to their line manager they're not feeling good about something. So often if we have announced something, we'll put a question in there. I say me. I'll put a question in there that follows up off the back of that. Like, since X policy has been launched, have you had a chance to read through it yet? And then they can go, yes, no, whatever, maybe add a couple of comments or something like that. And we also do a lot of focus groups where we ask people, if, again, completely voluntary, but come and talk to us about something. So we recently did one around time tracking because that's, I suppose, quite a different way of working for some people if they've not been used to it before. And for some people who have been used to it before, maybe like, it's kind of getting used to us maybe saying we want a little bit more emphasis on that. So we went through a bit of a, I suppose, tumultuous time working that one out. But what really helped was just speaking to people. So we said, we can sense that there's a bit of a conflict going on. Let's just talk. Come talk to us and tell us what's going on. And actually that now has led to us working on like a strategic initiative around that. We're calling it like simplifying delivery. Because actually what people were saying was, I don't mind time tracking, but it's this that's the problem. It's like this that stops me from doing it. So then we're like, oh, great. Well, now we know. We'll remove the barrier, or we'll try to. So I feel like people engaging with us and then us following up on it has been really important. Even things like the Great Place to Work survey. Of course, we want people to fill it in because then we will get ranked. And as well, it's really important that we see the data, see how we did last year. It's all anonymous. So it's very, very useful. However, I could just take that survey and look at it and then we get the rankings and then it just goes into the ether. But instead, we always do a follow-up. We show how we scored last year, how we're scoring this year, what were the common themes, what are our responses to those common themes, what are we going to do about it next time, and all of that kind of stuff to just be really transparent again about the fact that some things are great, maybe some things aren't, but because you've told us about it, now we're going to work on these things. And because we're stating it, again, it's a reason for people to be able to hold us to account. And also shows that if you're getting engaged and do stuff for us, we'll be, like you said, that two-way street. We'll be transparent with you. We'll share the information back with you. So I like to think that, like you said, it is a two-way street. We're giving people the right channels to feedback. Therefore, we shouldn't have any of that. And to be honest, we don't really. It's very minimal, which is fantastic.
That's great. I know from your organisation, you're obviously very ambitious. So I guess my last question for you is, are you expecting scale to bring any additional challenges to transparency?
Yeah, I think it will. We've already seen it actually because it started small. And, the advantages of that is that everyone's in the same office. You can look over at someone's desk, shout a question, or people hear conversations that are going on, or it's just easy to gather everyone around and go, hey, everyone, got an update, here you go. As we've grown bigger, even growing to, when I joined, it was about 55 people. It's now over 100 in 3 different office locations. So now trying to have the same conversations across all of those departments, channeled in the same way, with the same tone of voice, it does become a little bit difficult. But you just have to have a very good rollout plan with that, and also have leaders who are really engaged in that as well, and saying the right things and having the right kinds of messages, and then people being able to feed back to their leaders who then bring it back centrally. So just being like really mindful of when to land it, how are we doing it? Is it a video call that everyone joins with the leadership team? Is it a written document? Are we waiting until it's a company update and we're all together? What is the right platform and channel for that conversation to be had? And really understanding if you send something out, so say like a written comms, is there a channel for someone to ask a question? Because that's it. If it feels like a tell, I think that tends to be where maybe people aren't so happy. Whereas if it feels like, oh, okay, this is an update, but I might have a question, I'll go speak to this person or this person, and you're being signposted to those people, it tends to go down better. So it's just making sure you've got all the mechanisms in place, but it's never going to be perfect. And it really is difficult to try and please everybody. But again, if you're just continuing the same principles, but trying to scale it up and trying to think about what potential roadblocks you might have to landing the right message in the right way and trying to mitigate those, that's all you can do really, is just do your best to try and support everyone to understand a message.
Absolutely. And then any final pieces of advice to someone starting their transparency journey in a people leadership role?
Yeah, so I think it's this idea of it has to be the right thing for your organisation, and there's no one size fits all thing at all. And there are some things that I actually don't think you should be transparent about because it's not the right thing. For example, exits, like people leaving, that's such a personal thing for somebody that they might not want to share that. So it's not for us to talk about their personal circumstances without their permission. There are some people who we've asked, what message would you like us to send? And they've wanted us to send like a really small, short message. So we've done that. And of course, people have their own, that's when the side chats, have their own side chats about it, probably make up their own minds. Of course, they're, everyone's an adult, we get it, but it's not appropriate to share that. So I suppose there's a time and a place for it. And it's just about deciding, again, go back to that principles thing. What are our principles as a business? What are the things that we're happy to share? What are the things that we're not happy to share? And how do we do it? And who says it? Who are the people who, are the kind of voice of your organisation as well? Because I think not everyone is so great at storytelling. So it has to be the right person to land those types of messages. But yeah, I mean, it's a journey for sure. And like I said, as you get bigger, there's definitely challenges that come up. So you're never going to get it right. Like people are always going to have something that they grumble about. So you can't please everyone, but at least you can try and do the right things. And that's definitely what I live by. It's like, we're just trying to do the right things, share the right kind of information, and hopefully make it so that everyone enjoys coming to work.
Fantastic. Well, Zoe, that was absolutely fascinating. Thanks so much for coming on the show.